Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Dawn and watched the alien world grow larger on the main screen. The planet looked beautiful from space, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded him of Earth. But he knew the beings who lived there were nothing like humans. The Zorathians had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Their ships were bigger than human vessels, and their technology was older and more advanced. When humanity first made contact with them 5 years ago, the reptilian aliens had looked down on humans like they were children playing with toys. Today was supposed to change that. The New Dawn carried 15 of Earth's best diplomats, scientists, and trade experts. If everything went well, this mission would open up new worlds for human expansion and bring advanced alien technology back to Earth. Jake checked the passenger manifest one more time. Dr. Lisa Campbell led the science team. She was brilliant, with 3 degrees in biology and chemistry. Ambassador Kate Phillips headed the diplomatic corps. She had negotiated peace treaties on a dozen human worlds. Engineer Amy Rodriguez supervised the technical team. She could fix anything with engines or computers. In total, 15 women and 12 men made up the delegation. Jake had handpicked his crew of 23 people. Everyone aboard the New Dawn represented the best of humanity. The ship's communications, Officer Lieutenant Ben Parker turned from his station. Captain, we're getting a response from Zorath Prime. They're sending coordinates for our landing approach. Jake nodded. Take us in, slow and steady. Remember, this is a peaceful mission, the Gyo. New Dawn descended through the alien atmosphere. Cities came into view below, made of gleaming metal towers that stretched high into the sky. Zorathian architecture looked nothing like human buildings. Everything had sharp angles and dark surfaces that seemed to absorb light. The landing pad was enormous, big enough for ships 10 times the size of the New Dawn. As they touched down, Jake could see Zorathian soldiers waiting for them. The aliens stood 8 feet tall with scales that changed color from dark green to black. Their eyes were yellow and cold. Dr. Campbell joined Jake at the main viewport. They don't look very welcoming, she said. They never do, Jake replied. But we knew this wouldn't be easy. Ambassador Phillips gathered her team near the airlock. She wore formal diplomatic dress and carried herself with confidence. Remember, we're here to build bridges between our species. Stay calm, be respectful, and follow my lead. The airlock cycled open. Hot, dry air flowed into the ship, carrying strange smells that made some of the humans wrinkle their noses. The delegation walked down the ramp and onto alien soil. Supreme Commander Vexitar waited at the bottom of the ramp. He was larger than the other Zorathians, with scars across his scaled face and metal implants along his jaw. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel grinding together. Humans, he said. You are far from your small world. Ambassador Phillips stepped forward. Supreme Commander, thank you for welcoming us to Zorath Prime. We come in peace, seeking friendship and trade between our peoples. Vexitar's yellow eyes studied the human delegation. His gaze lingered on the women, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his reptilian features. Follow, he commanded. The High Council will see you. The humans were escorted through the alien city. Flying vehicles moved between the towers like metal insects. Zorathian citizens stopped to stare at the human visitors. Their expressions were impossible to read, but Jake sensed hostility in their cold stares. The government complex was a massive structure that looked more like a fortress than a place of diplomacy. Guard towers surrounded it, and armed soldiers stood at every entrance. The humans were led through multiple security checkpoints, each one more thorough than the last. Inside the building, the corridors were dimly lit and uncomfortably warm. The Zorathians preferred heat and darkness, which made the humans sweat in their formal clothes. They walked for what felt like miles before reaching their quarters. You will stay here, announced Commander Zekhar, Vexitar's second-in-command. Food will be brought. Do not leave these rooms without escort. The quarters were spacious but felt like a prison. There were no windows, and the doors could only be opened from the outside. Jake didn't like it, but they were guests in alien territory. He had to trust that diplomatic protocol would protect them. The next morning, the humans were brought before the Zorathian High Council. The chamber was huge, with seats arranged in circles that rose toward a dark ceiling. Hundreds of Zorathian officials watched as the human delegation entered. Supreme Commander Vextar sat on a throne-like chair at the center of the room. He wore ceremonial armor that made him look even more intimidating. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber. Humans claim they wish to trade with the Zorathian Empire. What do you offer that we cannot take? Ambassador Phillips maintained her diplomatic composure. We offer friendship, knowledge, and resources that could benefit both our peoples. Humanity has developed unique technologies that could complement Zorathian science. Dr. Campbell stepped forward with a small device. This is a medical scanner that can detect diseases at the cellular level. We would be happy to share this technology as a gesture of goodwill. The Zorathians muttered among themselves. Some seemed interested, but others looked skeptical. Vextar raised a clawed hand for silence. Your technologies are primitive compared to ours, he declared. But there is something about humans that interests the High Council. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't like the way Vextar was looking at the women in his delegation. Without warning, armed guards surrounded the human group. The aliens moved with practiced precision, energy weapons aimed at the startled diplomats. What is the meaning of this? Ambassador Phillips demanded. Vextar rose from his throne. Human females represent a potential biological threat to the Zorathian Empire. Your species is unknown, and your women carry genetic material that must be studied. Dr. Campbell backed away from the approaching guards. This is insane. We're diplomats under galactic law. Galactic law is what the Zorathian Empire says it is, Vextar replied coldly. The guards activated energy restraints, metal bands that glowed with blue light. They grabbed Dr. Campbell first, snapping the restraints around her wrists. She cried out as electricity coursed through the metal. Stop this, Jake shouted. He started toward Campbell, but a guard struck him with the butt of an energy rifle. He hit the floor hard, tasting blood. One by one, all 15 women in the delegation were seized and restrained. Ambassador Phillips, Dr. Campbell, Engineer Rodriguez, and 12 others were dragged away while the human men were forced to watch helplessly. You have made a terrible mistake, Jake gasped from the floor. Supreme Commander Vextar looked down at him with contempt. Have I? We shall see, human, we shall see. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the detention cell aboard his own ship, blood still dripping from his split lip. The Zorathian guards had beaten him unconscious after he tried to fight them in the council chamber. Now he was locked up with the other 11 men from the diplomatic mission, all of them battered and angry. Paul Carter, the senior trade negotiator, paced back and forth across the small cell. His expensive suit was torn and dirty. This is madness, he muttered. They can't just arrest diplomatic personnel. There are laws, treaties, protocols. Their laws, their space, replied Dr. Marcus Webb bitterly. The xenobiologist had a black eye and bruised ribs from trying to protect Dr. Campbell. We're not dealing with civilized beings here. Jake pressed his face against the energy barrier that kept them trapped. Through the transparent wall, he could see Zorathian soldiers guarding the corridor. They looked relaxed, almost bored. To them, this was just another day. Where do you think they took the women? Asked Lieutenant Ben Parker, the communications officer. Somewhere we can't get to them, Jake answered grimly. His mind kept replaying the scene in the council chamber, the terror in Dr. Campbell's eyes as they dragged her away. Ambassador Phillips trying to maintain dignity, even with energy restraints burning her wrists. Amy Rodriguez fighting until 3 guards had to hold her down. They had been in the cell for 6 hours when Commander Zekar appeared outside the barrier. The Zorathian scales had shifted to a darker shade, which Jake had learned meant amusement or satisfaction. Human Captain, Zekar said in his grinding voice. Supreme Commander, Vextar wishes to speak with you. Jake stood up slowly. Every muscle in his body ached, but he forced himself to show no weakness. What about my people? The males will remain here. The females are being properly examined. The word examined made Jake's blood run cold. He knew what that meant in Zorathian culture. They would poke and prod the women like laboratory specimens, taking samples, running tests, treating them like animals instead of human beings. 2 guards escorted Jake through the ship's corridors. It felt strange to be a prisoner aboard his own vessel. The Zorathians had taken control of everything, posting sentries at every important station. They had even replaced Jake's crew with their own technicians. Supreme Commander Vexitar waited, on the bridge, standing where Jake had stood just hours earlier. The alien commander looked out at the stars through the main viewport, his clawed hands clasped behind his back. "Your ship is well built for such a primitive design," Vexitar said without turning around. "Simple but functional, like your species." Jake said nothing. He had learned that silence sometimes worked better than words with aliens. Vexitar finally turned to face him. "I am prepared to offer you a choice, human captain. You may send one message to your homeworld. Tell them what has happened. Here, request whatever response you think appropriate." Jake felt his heart begin to race. This was exactly what he had been hoping for. "And then we will see how civilized your species truly is. Will they negotiate for the return of their females? Will they offer tribute? Or will they make empty threats like the other primitive races we have encountered?" The Zorathian commander gestured toward the communications console. "You have 5 minutes. Choose your words carefully." Jake walked to the comm station and activated the long-range transmitter. It would take the signal 3 days to reach Earth, but it would get there. He thought carefully about what to say. Every word mattered. The connection opened with a soft chime. Jake took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. "Earth Command. This is Captain Jake Morrison aboard the New Dawn. Mission status is Code Black. The Zorathians have arrested all female members of our delegation without cause or justification. They are holding them for what they call examination. The male delegation is imprisoned aboard our own ship." Jake paused and looked directly at Vexitar. The alien commander watched him with those cold yellow eyes, probably expecting him to beg for rescue or plead for diplomatic intervention. Instead, Jake smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Command, they took our women. All of them. Come. Heavy." He cut the transmission. Vexitar's scales shifted to a confused pattern of colors. "That is all? No formal protest? No diplomatic demands?" "That's all," Jake confirmed. 3 days later, the message reached Earth. President Helen Walsh stood in the war room deep beneath the Capitol, surrounded by her top military advisors. The recording of Jake's message had just finished playing, and the room was dead silent. General Frank Stone, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was the first to speak. "Madam President, we need to mobilize everything we have." Admiral Lisa Chen nodded in agreement. "The entire fleet. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon. This cannot stand." President Walsh looked around the room at the faces of her military commanders. She saw the same expression on every face that she felt in her own heart. Cold, deadly rage. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said quietly, "the Zorathians have made a fatal error. They think they're dealing with a species like all the others they've conquered. They don't understand what they've awakened." Dr. Marcus Webb's brother, Dr. Richard Webb, had been called in as an expert on human psychology. He stood up from his chair and activated a holographic display. "The Zorathians come from a species that evolved from prey animals," he explained. "They understand fear, submission, and dominance. But humans evolved from persistence hunters. We're predators, and our protective instincts toward our mates and offspring are hardwired into our DNA at a level that transcends rational thought." The hologram showed brain scans of human subjects under stress. When you threaten a human's family, you're not just making an enemy. You're triggering millions of years of evolutionary programming that turns ordinary people into unstoppable, killing machines. General Stone leaned forward. "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying the Zorathians have no idea what they've done. They've attacked human women in front of human men. In our evolutionary history, that's the one thing that triggers total warfare with no possibility of surrender or compromise." President Walsh stood up slowly. "Issue the mobilization order. Contact every colony, every corporation, every settlement in human space. Tell them what has happened. Tell them that every human being who can hold a weapon is needed. What about diplomatic channels? Asked Secretary of State James Murphy. Shouldn't we try to negotiate first? The president's expression was carved from stone. The time for diplomacy ended when they put their hands on our people. Now we show them what happens when you threaten human families. Within hours, the largest military mobilization in human history began. Ships that had been retired from service were pulled out of mothballs. Corporate fleets abandoned their trade routes. Colony defense forces left their posts and headed for the rally points. On Mars, the shipyards worked around the clock to finish vessels that were still under construction. On Europa, weapons factories that had been closed for years roared back to life. On Luna, the military academies graduated their cadets early and sent them to war. From Earth to the outer colonies, humanity prepared for war with a unity that had never been seen before. Old feuds were forgotten, territorial disputes were set. Aside, political differences were ignored. There was only one thing that mattered now. The aliens had taken human women, and they were going to pay for it with everything they had. Admiral Rick Hayes stood on the command deck of the Iron Resolve and watched the largest fleet in human history assemble around him. Ships appeared out of hyperspace every few minutes, their engines blazing as they took positions in the massive formation. The Iron Resolve was humanity's newest dreadnought, built in secret over the past 5 years. At 3 kilometers long, it carried enough firepower to level a planet. But it was just one ship among thousands gathering at the rally point. Military vessels formed the core of the fleet. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and frigates from every human world had answered the call. But civilian ships had come too. Corporate freighters had been converted into troop transports. Mining vessels now carried boarding pods instead of ore. Even luxury yachts had been fitted with weapons and armor. Captain Sarah Mitchell approached Admiral Hayes with the latest fleet reports. She was young for her rank, but the war had promoted many officers quickly. Sir, we now have 3,400 ships in formation. More are arriving every hour, Hayes nodded grimly. Status of the special projects? The stealth frigates are operational and ready for deployment. The kinetic bombardment platforms are loaded and positioned. The experimental antimatter vessels have passed all safety checks. These were weapons humanity had never revealed to the galaxy. Ships that could appear inside enemy formations without warning. Platforms that could drop tungsten rods from orbit with the force of nuclear weapons. Vessels powered by barely contained antimatter that could destroy entire fleets. The Zorathians thought they knew human military capability. They were about to learn how wrong they were. On the bridge's main screen, Admiral Hayes could see the edge of Zorathian space. Intelligence reports said the aliens had positioned 50 ships there to stop any rescue attempt. 50 ships against over 3,000. The Zorathians either didn't understand the situation, or they were completely insane. Meanwhile, on Zorath Prime, Dr. Lisa Campbell sat in a cold metal cell with the other captured women. The prison was underground, carved into solid rock with no windows or natural light. The air recycling system made everything smell like chemicals and rust. Ambassador Kate Phillips had organized the women into groups to maintain morale and share information. Dr. Campbell led the science team in studying their captors, looking for weaknesses. Engineer Amy Rodriguez worked on understanding the prison security systems. The Zorathians came for them regularly, taking 1 or 2 women at a time for what they called examinations. The procedures were humiliating and painful, involving blood, samples, tissue scrapings, and psychological tests. The aliens treated them like lab animals, showing no respect for their dignity or rights as sentient beings. But the women were learning things too. The guards were lazy and predictable. They followed the same routines every day. The security cameras had blind spots. The energy barriers that kept them locked up had a slight delay when switching between cells. Amy Rodriguez had the most useful discovery. During one of her examinations, she had managed to access a computer terminal for 30 seconds while the technician was distracted. In that brief time, she learned the prison's location and uploaded a virus into their systems that would cause minor malfunctions. Dr. Campbell was proud of how the women were handling their captivity. Instead of breaking down, they were gathering intelligence and preparing for whatever opportunity might come. They knew their people would come for them. They just had to survive until rescue arrived. Supreme Commander Vextar was having different thoughts. Reports from his intelligence network painted a disturbing picture. Human military forces were massing on an unprecedented scale. Colony fleets that had been fighting each other for decades were now working together. Corporate militias were abandoning profitable contracts to join government forces. Commander Zekar brought the latest intelligence summary to Vextar's command center. Supreme Commander, our agents report that humans are mobilizing their entire species for war. Over 4,000 ships have been detected moving toward our borders. Vextar's scales shifted to an annoyed yellow pattern. Impossible. No species commits their entire military to rescue a handful of prisoners. It makes no tactical sense. The reports are confirmed, sir. Human colonies that have been independent for centuries are now sending their defense fleets to join the main force. Corporations are converting civilian vessels into warships. Even their criminal organizations are offering ships and crews. This information troubled Vextar more than he wanted to admit. In his experience, species that were truly unified were dangerous opponents. Most races he had conquered were divided by politics, economics, or territorial disputes. The Zorathian Empire had always exploited these divisions to achieve victory. But the humans seemed to have no divisions when their females were threatened. Every faction, every group, every organization was working together toward the same goal. It was unprecedented in galactic history. Vextar called an emergency meeting of the High Council. The chamber filled with worried Zorathian officials who had been monitoring the human military buildup. Many were questioning the wisdom of arresting the human females. The humans are overreacting, Vextar declared. They will make threats, perhaps attack our border posts, then negotiate for the return of their people. This has happened before with other species. Council member Thekvar, an elderly Zorathian with scarred scales, raised a clawed hand. Supreme Commander, our intelligence suggests this situation is different. The humans show signs of total warfare commitment. Their historical records indicate they have a unique psychological response to threats against their breeding population. Explain, Vextar ordered. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a dangerous world. Their protective instincts toward mates and offspring are hardwired at a genetic level. When these instincts are triggered, they become capable of sustained warfare with no regard for casualties or cost. Vextar dismissed this with a wave of his hand. Primitive emotional responses. Civilized warfare is based on strategic calculation, not animal instincts. But privately, he was beginning to worry. The human fleet was larger than expected, and their response was more unified than any species he had encountered. Perhaps it was time to consider reinforcing the border defenses. He sent orders to recall the Third Fleet from patrol duties. Another 100 ships would surely be enough to handle whatever the humans might attempt. Back on the Iron Resolve, Admiral Hayes received the latest intelligence reports about Zorathian fleet movements. The aliens were pulling ships from other sectors to reinforce their borders. Good. That meant they were taking the threat seriously. But it was too little. Too late. The human war machine was fully committed now, and nothing would stop it until their people were free. Every delay, every day the women remained in captivity, only made humanity's response more devastating. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break upon the Zorathian Empire with a fury they could never have imagined. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zorathian territory, like an avalanche of metal and fury. Admiral Rick Hayes watched from the bridge of the Iron Resolve as thousands of ships materialized around him, their weapons already charging for battle. The Zorathian border fleet waited ahead of them, 50 ships arranged in a defensive formation around a military station. To most observers, it would have seemed like a reasonable force. The Zorathian vessels were larger than human ships, with thicker armor and more advanced shields. But Admiral Hayes knew something the Zorathians did not. Humanity had been preparing for this kind of war for decades, building weapons in secret, and developing tactics that no alien species had ever seen. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood beside him, studying the tactical display. "Sir, we're detecting 53 enemy vessels. Standard Zorathian battle formation, heavy cruisers in the center, with destroyers on the flanks. Any response to our arrival? They're broadcasting on all frequencies demanding that we turn back. Standard threats about the power of the Zorathian Empire." Hayes opened a communication channel to the entire human fleet. His voice carried to every ship, every captain, every soldier who had come to bring their people home. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten human families. These aliens took our women, our sisters, our daughters. They will learn that humanity protects its own. All units, weapons-free, show them no mercy." The battle began with a display of human technology that left the Zorathians stunned. Stealth frigates that had been invisible to their sensors suddenly appeared inside their formation, firing kinetic rounds at point-blank range. The projectiles punched through Zorathian shields like they were made of paper. Commander Vaktos of the Zorathian border fleet watched in horror as 3 of his heavy cruisers exploded in the first 30 seconds of combat. The human ships were using tactics he had never encountered. They would appear from nowhere, fire a devastating volley, then vanish back into stealth mode. "How are they doing this?" he shouted at his sensor operator. "Unknown, sir. Our scanners cannot detect them until they fire. By then, it is too late." More human ships were attacking now. Long-range artillery platforms fired tungsten rods from beyond visual range. The projectiles traveled at significant portions of the speed of light, hitting Zorathian vessels with the force of small nuclear weapons. Captain Steve Murphy commanded one of the human boarding ships. His vessel, the Retribution, specialized in close-quarters combat. As the main battle raged around them, Murphy led his ship directly toward a damaged Zorathian cruiser. "Boarding pods ready?" he called to his crew. "Ready, sir." 200 Marines. Locked and loaded, the Retribution launched its pods at the enemy ship. The small craft punched through the alien hull and disgorged their cargo of human soldiers. What happened next would become legend throughout the galaxy. Human Marines fought with a fury that terrified the Zorathians. They showed no fear of death, charging through enemy fire with weapons blazing. When their guns ran empty, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their bare hands. Zorathian soldiers had always considered themselves the ultimate warriors. They were larger, stronger, and better armed than most species. But the humans fought like creatures possessed, driven by rage over their captured women. Within 10 minutes, the Zorathian cruiser was in human hands. The pattern repeated across the battlefield as boarding parties captured ship after ship. So, aliens had never faced an enemy that fought with such determination. Commander Vaktos tried to organize a retreat, but it was too late. Human ships surrounded his remaining forces, cutting off all escape routes. The experimental antimatter vessels revealed themselves now, their exotic weapons tearing through Zorathian armor like it was made of cloth. The border fleet lasted exactly 19 minutes and 37 seconds. Admiral Hayes opened a communication, channeled to broadcast across all Zorathian frequencies. His message was simple and terrifying. "Zorathian Empire, this is Admiral Rick Hayes of the Human Defense Force. You have attacked our diplomatic mission and kidnapped our people. Release them unharmed, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and we will burn your civilization to ash. You have 12 hours to respond." The message was received in the Zorathian capital with shock and disbelief. Supreme Commander Vextar stared at the tactical display showing the complete destruction of his border fleet. 53 ships wiped out in less than 20 minutes. "This is impossible," he said to his staff. "No species has ever defeated a Zorathian fleet so decisively." Commander Zekhar brought him the damage reports. "Sir, we lost every ship at the border. The humans captured 7 vessels intact and destroyed the rest. Their tactics are unlike anything in our military databases." "What about casualties?" "Complete. No survivors from the destroyed ships. The captured vessels report that human boarding parties showed no mercy to armed resistance." Vextar felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. Fear. Not just concern or worry, but pure, cold terror at what these humans might be capable of. News of the human victory spread through the galaxy faster than light travel. Species that had been conquered by the Zorathians watched in amazement as reports came in. The mighty Zorathian Empire, rulers of this sector for 1,000 years, had just lost an entire fleet to newcomers from a primitive world. The Kethran Confederacy called an emergency session of their ruling council. The Vorthan Republic recalled their ambassadors from Zorathian space. Even the powerful Hegemon Alliance began mobilizing their own fleets, sensing that the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift. On the prison world of Zorath Prime, Dr. Lisa Campbell felt the ground shake as emergency sirens wailed throughout the city. The Zorathian guards were running around in panic, shouting orders in their harsh language. "What's happening?" asked Ambassador Kate Phillips. Engineer Amy Rodriguez had managed to tap into the prison's communication system during the chaos. She listened to the Zorathian military channels for several minutes before turning to the other women with a smile. "Our people just destroyed their entire border fleet. The cavalry is coming, and they are not happy." The women cheered, their voices echoing through the underground prison. For the first time since their capture, they had hope. Humanity was coming for them, and nothing would stand in their way. Supreme Commander Vextar stood in his command center, watching as more human ships appeared on long-range sensors. Thousands of vessels, all heading straight for the heart of his empire. He had 12 hours to make a decision that would determine the fate of his entire species. He could surrender and release the human prisoners, admitting defeat to a species he had considered primitive. Or he could fight and face the full wrath of humanity's war machine. Pride and fear warred in his reptilian heart as the deadline approached. Supreme Commander Vextar paced in his command center as the 12-hour deadline approached. Reports flooded in from across the Zorathian Empire, each one worse than the last. Human forces were not just advancing toward the capital. They were systematically destroying everything in their path. Colonel Steve Murphy led the human ground forces as they liberated Zorathian worlds. But liberation was not the right word for what the humans were doing. They were methodically erasing every trace of Zorathian military power from each planet they reached. On the mining world of Kethva, human troops landed and destroyed every military installation within 6 hours. They targeted government buildings, communication centers, and weapon factories. But they carefully avoided civilian areas, showing a precision that confused the Zorathians. "Why do they not kill our people?" asked Commander Thekmol as he watched his base burn from orbit. Colonel Murphy answered that question in his report to Admiral Hayes. "We're not monsters like them. We don't make war on civilians. But every soldier, every official, every person who supports their military gets exactly what they deserve." The pattern repeated on world after world. Human forces would arrive, demand surrender, then systematically dismantle Zorathian power structure when they refused. Orbital platforms were destroyed, ground bases were leveled, and military personnel were either killed or captured. But the most terrifying part was the speed. Human forces moved through Zorathian space like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Ships that had taken the Zorathians decades to build were reduced to scrap metal in minutes. On Zorath Prime, the captured women had become the center of a crisis that Supreme Commander Vexitar could no longer ignore. Dr. Lisa Campbell had used Amy Rodriguez's sabotage work to access more of the prison's computer systems. What she found there changed everything. The Zorathians were not just examining the human women. They were planning to execute them as an example to show the galaxy that the Zorathian Empire would not be intimidated by primitive species. "The execution order is already written," Dr. Campbell told the other women in a hushed voice. "They're waiting for Vextar to give the final command." Ambassador Kate Phillips felt cold fear settle in her stomach. "When?" "Soon. Maybe hours. They want to broadcast it across the galaxy to break human morale." Engineer Amy Rodriguez clenched her fists. "Then we need to get word to our people. If they know what the Zorathians are planning, maybe they can do something." Dr. Campbell nodded. "I've been working on that. Amy's virus gave me access to their communication system. I can send a coded message, but it will only reach local channels." "Do it," Phillips ordered. "Our people need to know." The message went out on a frequency that Zorathian intelligence monitored. Within an hour, it was decoded and transmitted to the human fleet. Admiral Hayes received the intelligence report while reviewing battle plans for the assault on Zorath Prime. Captain Sarah Mitchell brought him the decoded message. Her face was pale as she handed him the datapad. "Sir, you need to see this immediately." Hayes read the message twice, his expression growing darker with each word. The Zorathians were planning to execute the women and broadcast it as propaganda. They thought murdering innocent prisoners would somehow intimidate humanity into backing down. They could not have been more wrong. Hayes activated the fleet-wide communication system. His voice carried to every ship, every soldier, every human, being in the massive armada that was converging on the Zorathian homeworld. "All units, this is Admiral Hayes. We have received intelligence that the enemy intends to execute our people and broadcast their deaths to terrorize humanity into submission. I have one response to this threat." He paused, letting his words sink in across the fleet. "You have sentenced your own species to extinction. All ships, maximum speed to Zorath Prime. No quarter given, no prisoners taken. We end this now." Change in the human fleet was immediate and terrifying. Ships that had been holding formation for strategic approach suddenly broke into attack groups and accelerated toward the Zorathian capital. Stealth vessels vanished from sensors as they moved ahead to scout defenses. Kinetic bombardment platforms armed their most destructive weapons. Supreme Commander Vextar watched the human fleet's movements from his command center and finally understood the magnitude of his error. These were not rational beings who could be intimidated or negotiated with. They were predators whose protective instincts had been triggered at the deepest genetic level. "Sir," Commander Zekhar reported, with fear in his voice, "human fleet movements indicate they are preparing for total assault. They have abandoned all defensive formations and are moving at maximum combat speed. How long until they reach us?" 18 hours at current velocity." Vextar realized he had two choices. He could execute the human women as planned and face the complete annihilation of his species, or he could try to use them as bargaining chips to negotiate some kind of peace. But as he watched the tactical display showing thousands of human ships racing toward his homeworld with murderous intent, he began to suspect that negotiation was no longer possible. The humans had moved beyond rational thought into pure revenge mode. Reports came in from the outer defenses. Human advance forces were already engaging Zorathian patrol fleets. The aliens were losing every encounter, their ships destroyed or captured with ruthless efficiency. Captain Ben Tucker commanded one of the human stealth squadrons. His orders were simple: eliminate all Zorathian forces between the main fleet and the capital world. His ships moved through space like ghosts, appearing only to deliver death. "Target acquired," reported his weapons officer. "Zorathian heavy cruiser, minimal escort." "Destroy it," Tucker ordered. "No survivors." The stealth ships opened fire with concentrated antimatter beams. The Zorathian vessel exploded in a burst of light that could be seen across the star system. The few escape pods that launched were tracked down and destroyed. This was not warfare as the galaxy understood it. This was extermination, pure and simple. Humanity had decided that the Zorathian Empire was a threat that could not be allowed to exist. News of human victories continued to reach other species throughout the galaxy. The mighty Zorathian Empire, which had seemed invincible for 1,000 years, was being systematically destroyed by a species most had never heard of 6 months ago. The Andromedan Council sent urgent messages to both sides calling for peace negotiations. The Galactic Trade Federation offered to mediate. Even the isolationist void dwellers emerged from their hidden systems to observe this unprecedented conflict. But humanity ignored all diplomatic overtures. They had one goal now: recover their people and punish those who had dared to threaten them. Everything else was irrelevant. On Zorath Prime, the prison guards had stopped their regular routines. They stood around in small groups, talking in worried voices about the approaching human fleet. Some were already preparing to abandon their posts. Dr. Campbell smiled as she watched their fear grow. Soon, very soon, rescue would come. And when it did, The Zorathians would learn what happened when you threatened human families. The storm was almost upon them, and it would sweep away everything in its path. The Battle of Zorath Prime began at dawn on the alien homeworld. Admiral Rick Hayes watched from the bridge of the Iron Resolve as his massive fleet dropped out of hyperspace around the heavily defended planet. What he saw waiting for them was the largest Zorathian armada ever assembled. Over 2,000 warships surrounded Zorath Prime in defensive layers. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons powerful enough to destroy moons. Even civilian vessels had been pressed into service, their hulls reinforced and fitted with whatever guns the Zorathians could find. Supreme Commander Vextar had called in every favor, recalled every ship, and mobilized every resource the Empire possessed. This was their last stand, and they knew it. "Sir," reported Captain Sarah Mitchell, "enemy fleet composition is massive. Heavy battleships, orbital fortresses, and at least 300 converted civilian vessels. They're throwing everything they have at us." Admiral Hayes studied the tactical display. The Zorathians had positioned their forces well, creating overlapping fields of fire that would devastate any conventional attack. But humanity had not come here to fight a conventional battle. "Signal all stealth squadrons," Hayes ordered. "Begin infiltration. Target the orbital defenses first, then the command ships. Remember, our people are somewhere on that planet. Precision strikes only until we have them back." Captain Ben Tucker led the first wave of stealth frigates through the Zorathian defensive perimeter. His ships were invisible to enemy sensors, ghosts that moved between the alien vessels like death itself. They had practiced this maneuver 1,000 times, but never in a battle this large. "Target the defense platform control centers," Tucker commanded his squadron. "Take them out fast and quiet." The stealth ships opened fire simultaneously. Antimatter beams lanced out from empty space, striking the orbital platforms with surgical precision. Command centers exploded. Weapons systems went dark and shields collapsed as the invisible attackers struck vital systems. Supreme Commander Vextar watched in horror as his orbital defenses began failing one by one. His sensors showed no enemy ships in those positions, but the destruction was real and devastating. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. Our scanners detect no vessels, but the weapons fire is coming from multiple vectors." While the stealth squadrons disabled the orbital defenses, the main human fleet began its assault. Kinetic bombardment platforms fired tungsten rods at the Zorathian battle line. The projectiles moved faster than the eye could follow, punching through alien shields and armor like they were made of paper. But the Zorathians fought back with desperate courage. Their ships charged into the human formation, trading shot for shot with vessels twice their firepower. They knew they were facing extinction, and they would not go quietly. Colonel Steve Murphy led the most critical mission of the battle, while the fleets fought in space above. His special forces had one job: find and rescue the captured human women before the Zorathians could harm them. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos commanded the rescue operation on the ground. Her team had practiced urban combat for years, but this was different. They were fighting to save their own people in an alien city under bombardment. "Intel says the prison is 3 kilometers underground," Santos reported to her team. "Heavy security, multiple checkpoints, and probably booby traps. We go in fast, hit hard, and get our people out." The rescue shuttles dropped through Zorath Prime's atmosphere under cover of the space battle above. Zorathian fighters tried to intercept them, but human escort vessels cleared the way with ruthless efficiency. In the underground prison, Dr. Lisa Campbell and the other women could feel the building shake as explosions rocked the city above. The Zorathian guards were panicking, running between cells and shouting orders in their harsh language. "They're coming," Amy Rodriguez whispered to the others. "I can hear human weapons fire getting closer." Ambassador Kate Phillips organized the women into groups near the cell barriers. "When rescue arrives, stay together and do exactly what they tell us. We're getting out of here." The battle in space reached its climax as Admiral Hayes committed his reserve forces. The experimental antimatter vessels revealed their true power, unleashing energy beams that could cut through multiple enemy ships at once. Zorathian battle formations dissolved under the assault. But Supreme Commander Vextar had one last card to play. As his fleet crumbled around him, he gave the order he hoped would save his people. Execute the human prisoners immediately. Broadcast their deaths across all frequencies. Show the galaxy what happens to those who defy the Zorathian Empire. The order reached the prison guards just as Lieutenant Colonel Santos and her team breached the outer defenses. Human soldiers fought their way through the underground complex, their weapons cutting down any Zorathian who stood in their way. The rescue team reached the prison level as the guards were preparing to execute Dr. Campbell and the others. What followed was a brief, violent battle that ended with every Zorathian guard dead and all 15 women safe. "Dr. Campbell?" Santos called out as she cut through the energy barriers. "Here," Campbell replied, her voice shaking with relief. "All 15 of us are here." Santos activated her comm unit. "Admiral Hayes, this is Santos. Package secured. All packages secured and in good condition." On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Hayes felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The women were safe. Now he could finish what the Zorathians had started. "All ships," he broadcast across the fleet, "our people are safe. You are weapons-free. Show them the price of threatening human families." What followed was not a battle but an execution. Human ships that had been holding back to avoid collateral damage now unleashed their full firepower. Orbital bombardment platforms targeted every Zorathian military installation on the planet. Kinetic strikes destroyed government buildings, command centers, and weapons factories. Within 2 hours, the Zorathian Empire's military capacity was completely destroyed. Their fleet was either captured or reduced to debris. Their orbital defenses were scrap metal. Their ability to wage war had been eliminated forever. Supreme Commander Vextar found himself alone on his command ship, his fleet destroyed around him. Human vessels surrounded his position, their weapons trained on his vessel but not firing. Then came a transmission from Admiral Hayes. "Supreme Commander Vextar, this is Admiral Rick Hayes. You threatened our families. You attacked our people. You learned too late that humanity protects its own. I offer you the same mercy you showed our diplomats. Surrender now, and your death will be quick." Vexatar looked around his ruined command center. His empire was gone, his people defeated, his civilization brought to its knees in a matter of days. The humans had done what no species in galactic history had accomplished. "I surrender," he said quietly. The war was over, but its consequences would reshape the galaxy forever. President Helen Walsh stood before the Galactic Council 1 month later, representing humanity for the first time. The chamber was packed with representatives from every major species, all of them watching the newcomers with a mixture of fear and respect. "Humanity seeks peace and cooperation with all sentient beings," she announced. "We will trade fairly, share knowledge freely, and respect your sovereignty completely. But understand this. We protect our own. Threaten any human and you threaten all humans. Attack our families and we will burn your civilization to ash. This is not a threat. This is a promise." The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had announced its arrival as a major power in the most dramatic way possible, and no one would ever forget it.